Hi everyone. I just thought I'll share something I've been working on over the last week. I've been relatively quiet on social media. I think the reason for that was largely because I was working on this particular project. Now, I'll just talk a little bit about this project and show you why I built it, and of course, talk about why I'm showcasing this in the first place. So, this is a practice that we follow at V45. So, V45 is my application security services company where we do pen testing, threat modeling, cloud security assessments, and so on. Now, and we do a whole bunch of things around custom SAST and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we do, especially when we do pen testing or when we do security architecture review, is something called an offensive threat model, right? So we, especially for pen testing, we do this offensive threat modeling process where we look at a system, we threat model the system, and we based on the threat model, we identify the security test cases and then go about testing those security test cases as part of the penetration testing, either through automated or manual means or whatever it is, right? So we do all of these different things as part of that process. Now, one of the thoughts that, especially after AI and Gen AI and LLMs have come out, one of the thoughts was why not build something that can speed up the process and also deliver much better value in terms of this particular process of being able to perform an offensive threat model and have somebody validate it. Of course, it's not going to be an entirely automated process, but have somebody validate it and then come up with the fact that the AI should be able to come up with something very useful, very quick, at the same time, be comprehensive and also give us ideas beyond what we could have potentially thought of. So that is the idea behind this particular project, and we called it Sarpaastra, a which is supposed to be a weapon, a mythical weapon from the Mahabharata. So that's why we called it this. Anyway, so this is the tool that I built, and I built this tool largely with AI, with Cursor and Claude. And I just thought I'll showcase it because this was a unique experience for me. I did not build this from scratch myself. I largely used Gen AI and LLMs to build the product as well. And of course, I had to change a few things in the middle. There were a few things that I liked, few things I didn't. I just want to talk about this experience and share this video with all of you to talk about how I went about doing it, what it does, of course, talk about the tool and so on. So this is the way I'll talk about how I built this, why I built this, and of course, I'll just show you the application as we're going about this. This is an internal project. We're not exposing this externally. This is largely an internal project that we use or we're planning to use. We're just about to deploy this pretty soon. So anyway, so let's first talk about the architecture. I want to keep it exceedingly simple. I did not want to bring in any cloud elements. First of all, there is a lot of potential issues with cloud because we need to run this on ephemeral environments, which means that we just need to spin it up, run it, and maybe even kill it, destroy it after it's done running. So the idea is that it needs to run largely off a single server. I didn't bring in any cloud components. I didn't bring in any cloud databases, backend as a service, none of that stuff. It's all a single Python application, a Flask application. The front end, I mean, the web server's going to be caddy. We've not, of course, I've not deployed this anywhere in production yet, but this is going to be caddy. The idea is that I don't even want this deployed in production as a full-fledged service. This is typically engagement to engagement. Once the engagement is done, the application is destroyed, the data is destroyed, the whole thing is destroyed, right? So the idea is that it is ephemeral. It's just available for our internal users, engagement to engagement, and we have this way of orchestrating it, spinning up and down. Now, the idea is that we use this application. It just an SQLite database. SQLite is more than sufficient for these kind of workloads. It has a small scheduler component for background tasks. Background tasks are largely going to be tasks that are going to be AI-driven workflows. We're going to be using Azure OpenAI. The reason is that we don't want to use the external OpenAI API. Just want to use the Azure OpenAI just to make sure that it is a lot more curtailed in terms of access and so on and so forth. And it's also the data sharing and all of those issues come into the picture here. So that's the reason why we're using this particular stack. Anyway, so the idea here is that you have projects, you have applications under the project, and you have multiple things under each application. You can end of the day generate reports and so on and so forth. So I am going to use an example from our threat modeling class where we have some example of the application and some diagrams and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be using that here as an example. So I'm just going to create one of the things before I go ahead. I just want to talk about some of the things that I learned doing this, because this app was largely built by AI. This is not one of those to-do apps that you see on YouTube where it was just like, okay, I built this app in like 15 minutes and stuff like that. It was not definitely a 15-minute experience. It took much longer than that. It took me a good week to do this. And when I say week, I don't mean I was spending all my time on this. I was spending maybe an hour or maximum 2 hours per day on this. It was not entirely the whole thing, which was itself a huge productivity boost, because if I had to build this application on my own without any help from AI, it would have taken a much longer time. But that is, but just to let you know, this is not, a 15-minute thing that I was able to get done and I could just walk away from. This was not that. There are a few things that I found to be extremely useful when building this app through AI, and there were a few really painful points that I had to go through when building this app through AI. So let's talk about all those things as I'm walking through this. So first thing that I felt was great was the fact that it gave me some very interesting UI ideas, things that I added to the. So first of all, this is a very different app from what most people build with AI. Most people typically build JS, Next.js stuff with AI. I've seen that it's only VO and Next.js and so on and so forth. They don't have any other type of thing. Whereas this application is a Flask application. I initially wanted to start off with a Fast API application, but then I realized that Fast API is not very well supported with LLMs. LLMs don't seem to do a very good job of Fast API at all. So they are much better trained on Flask. I think there's a lot more training data on Flask, which is why perhaps Flask was the better fit. I use SQLite simply because, again, SQLite's embedded. I can delete it. I'm done with it once an engagement is over. I don't need to worry about persistence. That was the reason I used that. So while I'm walking through it, I'm just going to explain some of the things. So for me, the first thing that was very interesting while doing this was the fact that it came up with UI ideas based on what I described. And this is not something I would have done. I kind of went with the UI it gave me because I felt it was quite intuitive. There are a few changes that I requested along the way, but I think it was quite intuitive for the way it built the UI. Yes, I'm sure some of you will find issues with the UI, and I'm not saying it's the best UI in the world, but it serves the purpose and it gets the job done, and it's very simple to use, and I think it gets the job done pretty easily. So that's the reason why I went with this. So let's start with the functionality. So in this, you have essentially projects and you have applications, and under applications you have the findings, the threat scenarios, the security test cases, and of course you have all of the, you can even upload vulnerability data and so on and so forth. So this is, and I'm kind of halfway through the last part of it, which is the vulnerability data. I'm not fully done with it. All of these are run as background AI tasks with OpenAI, and that's how it works. So first of all, let's create projects. So Acme events. I'm going to call this Acme events. This is an example that I use in my threat modeling class. So that's the reason I have Acme events. So as soon as you create it, you'll see that and first of all, I'm not using a React or Vue or something like that. I'm just using very simple Tailwind CSS with server-side rendered templates with Jinja 2, which is a basic Python application, but it still gets the job done. It's very fast, it's very responsive, especially for the way we want to run it. It gets the job done. So now you essentially have this view of the project. You have multiple applications that you can add under the project. So let's call this an Acme events app. So here, I'm just going to copy paste some descriptions from here. I have this in my threat modeling class. So I'm just going to take this and make a few changes to it. Now, the thing is, so what I've done here is that when I'm consuming the application, I essentially want the application to have some information. And this is the description of the application. And I store all this in Markdown. The reason I store this in Markdown is that LLMs, I find, typically respond a lot better to Markdown. in terms of as part of the prompt. So I'm guessing that that is the reason why it works pretty well. I can add, so I'm just adding some technology, but this actually I don't need to do. I'm just going to remove this. Actually, this is not necessary at all. But yeah, I don't think we need this at all. So let's remove this. And so basically, the idea is that I have a description, I have key functionality. So this is typically what we do as well. In V45, we capture all of this data as part of the scoping process, right? So what are the key functions, what are the key features, etc., etc. We capture all of this stuff. Um, and we use this as a way to perform our offensive threat model, a way to set up an input for our pen test. What is the stuff that we need to actually be testing something we capture here? So I'm just going to copy this and put this in the key functionality. I'm not thinking too much about the depth of this content yet. Now I'm just going to put in some information about what kind of language framework it is, and deployment environment. I'm going to say AWS EKS. I'm going to say what type of application, microservices style. I'm also going to upload a diagram. Now, this is something that I find it to be very useful simply because we use diagrams a lot in as part of the scoping process, and I'm going to be uploading this diagram. And the idea is that this diagram is going to be useful in very shortly. So I'm going to use this diagram very shortly as part of the AI process. So let me just save all this data. And once I save this, it basically goes into an application flow. So this has an application. So you'll see that I've created this app. It has 0 threat scenarios, 0 test cases. Now you'll see that there is the system information, the diagram, etc., and you see a whole bunch of application related actions from here that I'm going to be using pretty soon. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate something called component information. So this, what it's going to do is basically going to read this diagram that I've uploaded, and it's going to come up with component information. The reason for this is when I'm creating my threat scenarios and my test cases, remember, so there are two things that I'm doing here. First, I'm creating a bunch of threat scenarios. These are threats to the application that I think it has. Now, the AI generates some threats. The idea is that the AI is going to generate some threats. Our security engineers and analysts put in their own threats, and it basically is like a combination of man plus machine. Coming up with some ideas on threat scenarios. From there, we populate test cases, security test cases. These are specific things that we will do to test the application from a penetration testing perspective. Finally, we can generate, you can even add findings to this in the form of, you could add your findings, your manual findings, you could upload reports from Zap, Burp, whatever. And that's basically how this works. Now, this, again, this UI stuff largely was generated by Claude. The UI inspiration was largely Claude. It was not really something I did. I just gave it some inputs as to, okay, I wanted this and so on and so forth, and this is how it generated it, or this is how it chose to represent it. Now, a few things that I felt with this. One, like I said, the couple of upsides I've spoken of with AI. It was fast. It gave me some interesting design choices that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. But the bad thing was that, especially when you're working with complex applications, real world complex applications, and I consider this slightly complex real world application, a lot of AI related, especially with Cursor and Claude, because Cursor requires you to use something called the compose mode and things like that. It undoes some of the work you've done and redoes the wrong things, which is a painful thing to do. So you need to be really careful as to what you need to do. You need to commit often. You need to make sure that you have working functionality, properly tested functionality before you actually do very, very complicated things. So that was one of the big downsides I felt. I felt that there was a lot of rework that could have been avoided if I'd built it manually. But again, I couldn't have built it at the pace I built it. So that's another thought as well. Anyway, so let's actually go ahead and generate the component information. Now, as soon as I do this, it's going to start a job with the AI that will generate component mapping information. So it's going to read the diagram, generate all the components, the connections with the components, and it's going to essentially it's going to create a job to do this. Now, this job can be tracked with the jobs thing, and you can see that it completes the job. And once I actually go ahead and view this, you'll see that there's a new field that's populated with all the components information, right? So you'll see that The relationships with the data flow and so on have been populated very cleanly. It's very nice. This is very useful because uh, this is going to be fed in when we want to do the threat scenarios and so on. And one of the things that I did was, as soon as this component information is populated for any app, that button goes away. So it's just very simple. You don't have to bother about it afterwards. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate some threat scenarios. Now, threat scenarios right now, there's nothing, but I'm going to generate them first. So as soon as I do this, again, it's going to generate a job of all the threat scenarios. Now, this, I have all of these prompts mapped out in the back, and of course, it's going to use the capabilities, the description, the components, all of that stuff. It's going to be using that, and it seems to be done. So that it's calculated, generated 10 threat scenarios. You can actually go ahead and you'll see all of these different threat scenarios. And actually, you will see that they're quite relevant. You can generate more. And if you generate more, it will make sure that there are no duplicates. I've added that functionality. It's very interesting. So that is something that I have done, which is, and it's quite good because it's able to identify very useful things, and it's also able to identify things that are relevant for this application. So threat scenarios, done. It's already done. Right now, let's talk about security test cases. Right now, let's look at the security test cases. I can either create a test case or generate test cases. Now, let's actually go ahead and generate them, because who wants to create them, right? You want to generate them. That's the point here. So I'm going to generate these test cases very similar to this. Now, it's going to iterate through the threat scenarios, generate test cases for each, and it is also going to make sure that there are no duplicates between the threat scenarios that are already been created. So the test cases that have already been created. So this is usually the longest running job as part of the app. This takes a while, and you'll see that it starts to get populated pretty soon. So all this is being done as a background task by the scheduler. So you'll see that it's currently done 16. As you're refreshing it, you should see more showing up. Yeah, so you'll see that more shows up all time. Now, the security test cases are also, I found to be quite nice. They're quite useful. I have basically created something called this, basically saying that, okay, this is what you need to do. These are the testing steps. And we've also set a pass fail. So this is something that we do anyway as part of our process. We set up a pass fail kind of a thing where we say that, okay, we test all of these things, right? And more, obviously, we are going to add our own test cases. But the idea is that we test all of these different things, and you can essentially pass fail all of these things. So the idea is that you come up with different test cases and you pass fail them. So pass essentially means that it's not vulnerable. Fail essentially means that it's vulnerable. So it's failed until it passes. So the idea is that the pen tester or the security reviewer needs to essentially walk through this, make sure that they are checking this off. And it's a very customized checklist because it's based on the application, the description, the threat scenarios, all of that stuff, right? So that is really one of the things that I found to be very useful, because this takes a long time for us. This does take the most amount of time, simply because this is a very, very detailed process. This generating this takes a long time. So the good thing is, with this, it helps us, it helps the customer, and it also helps us get new ideas or better ideas beyond what just we could identify ourselves. At the same time, there is always a person in the loop. It's not just you know AI doing things and doing everything for us. There's always a person in the loop validating this stuff. So I thought this was very useful, and I think that for our team internally, this is going to be extremely useful, because it's going to save their time. At the same time, it is going to make a lot of sense for them to do this. Now, so this is done. So you can see that each application, in fact, if you go back and now you'll see, it's generated about 69, 70 test cases. Might even have generated more. Let's look at the jobs. Okay, this is also done. So it generated about 69 test cases. So yeah, so it generates for each, it generates X number that it feels is correct. So that's what it does. And you can also start finding. So you can also start creating findings, and you can associate them with test cases. So you can associate them with test cases. These are manual findings. So this could be evidences, screenshots, etc. All of these things it came up with, except for this widget. This is something that I asked it to create. And I did not write any except OpenAI code. I did not write any other code. This was really all what it came up with. Um, so it really did all of this stuff. There is no uh, most of the application was really not me. The I did maybe most of it was basically conceptualizing. On my part, it was conceptualizing the quality of the prompts, especially the specificity of the prompts, the specificity of using all of these things were essentially mine. But most of it was really, uh, Cursor and Claude, right? So here, if you see export threat scenarios and test cases, it basically gives you an export of all the threat scenario and test cases in Excel form, which is something that we share with the customer as well. Now you can also upload findings. Now here I'm going to, so basically what I wanted to do was, this is a very interesting thing because when you have this, you are basically using this for like something like a vulnerability management, right? Now the thing with this is that you have to build parsers for a lot of different applications. So let's say you are uploading an Nmap report or a burp report or a zap report or whatever it is. You have a lot of different applications that you need to build parsers for because you need to integrate with these tools. But with AI, the cool thing is you can do extraction with AI, and you can extract it to very specific formats. You can enrich the data based on extraction. So the idea is that I never have to build a parser. The parser also is entirely uh, built by AI, which means that it parses any data structure which is JSON or XML, which is most of the time what the tools give you an output for. So let's actually see. So I have some test zap report. I'm sure I have it somewhere. Yeah, so I just have some random Zap report from somewhere. I'm just going to. This is not a real Zap report. This is just not a real Zap report of a real application. This is just one of the applications that I was using for our training. So when I upload the findings, you'll see that this is also processed as a job, right? So you'll see that the findings are processed as a job, and this is also done through the AI because the AI extracts it. I have not built any parser for Zap or Burp or anything like that. It's just processed it like an AI task itself, and its AI is being used for extraction related activities. So you will see that I may need to add a findings section, but you'll see now that it has actually been able to capture all of that stuff. It's been able to capture the HTTP request, the response, um, and the evidences. I also have a section for evidences and so on. So the idea here is that it should be able to, so building parsers also from an AI perspective is basically not necessary anymore because you have the ability for the LLM to be able to extract information from structured data sets and generate a structured data set from that, which is very interesting to me. So I found this to be coming from, so I've built vulnerability management and correlation products in the past, and that was one of the biggest pain points that uh, you would get very very weird data sets from different tools. They would have different formats, there are different ways of expressing it, and even though there are standardized formats today like SARF and ASFF and so on and so forth, it's still not great because the data sets from most tools are wildly disparate. With AI, the benefit of this is you can enrich this on the fly as things are being uploaded and processed. This is a huge, huge, huge upside. So I think that this was one of the things that I really enjoyed. I still need to finish some of this where I need to associate it with test cases. Again, this I can do with the LLM as well. But this is what I created. So basically, the idea here was that I built this real world internal application, which is probably going to production in this coming week. And this is what I thought of doing with this, which is basically using it for an internal, very real use case. And in our case, and it even created a user management module and so on and so forth. So the idea here is that I built something with AI, largely with AI. I would say about 95% with AI, maybe a little bit of my work in terms of developing. Most of my work was largely making sure that things work and the prompts and the actual functionality, defining parts of the UI, but everything else was done by the AI, right? Now a few things that I found which was a little quirky and probably negative in my experience. One is the fact that rework happens because you do something, AI just decide, or your cursor just decides to erase that functionality and do something else. That I've seen happen many times, especially when you are trying to rework functionality. That is something that I've seen. I've also seen it running into issues with some security features like CSRF tokens and so on and so forth. It does not configure them correctly, especially for Flask and so on, which is obviously something that you have to be mindful of. The other thing that it does is that it does create a very proper structure for the application in terms of the different modules and different source files and so on, but it tends to not follow. It tends to still kind of concentrate the functionality in one single file or in one single source structure. So I find that to be a little odd, but that's fine because the application that I'm building is not huge. But if you're looking at very clean code, you're probably going to be disappointed on that front. So this was something that I built this over a week, and I think this is revolutionary as far as I think, because it allowed me to move much faster. This was something that I was planning to do for our internal productivity, and the fact that we do this, we get the best results out of this. I found this to be very powerful, and I'm going to continue iterating on this. And yeah, I'm probably going to building some agent workflows and stuff like that into this. It already does have a few things, but I'm planning to do a lot more with this over time. So this is what I had. I just thought I'll share this with all of you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and have a good rest of your day.